Rareware. They're one of the biggest names in video game history, developing world-renowned classics. They covered every genre you could imagine, and even if they didn't set the bar, you could count on some fresh ideas. One of these unique takes is a third-person shooter that just might have been one of the most inventive N64 titles ever made. The year is 1999. Fresh off a couple of years of noteworthiness, Rare starts to get more creative. The seminal GoldenEye had shown the gaming world the possibilities of console first-person shooters, so they tried their hand at a new perspective, and thus Force Gemini was born. Now, it isn't the most well-known game. You'd think it would have gotten more recognition considering Rare developed it, yet that just isn't true. I think this is kind of a shame because I really enjoyed this game growing up. Drawing from a wide range of influences, Force Gemini is an interstellar adventure. You play as three characters, Juno, Vela, and their dog, Lupus. As the last remnant of the Jet Force fleet, they're the only ones left who can stop Mizar and his horde. The evil insect overlord destroyed your compatriots and wants to enslave the rest of the galaxy, and that's just not cool. The plot isn't exactly the deepest. Three heroes who have to fight the forces of evil, the odds stacked against them. While I do enjoy a story with deep themes and developed characters, sometimes this is all you need. The plot is short, sweet, and wastes little time getting you into the action. Now, I call this an adventure game because it's not all about shooting. There are little bits of collecting and platforming that are synonymous with Rare, yet shooting is the main aspect, so that needed to be right, and well, Force kinda gets it. The third-person perspective is interesting for the field of view it provides. When you're running around, the camera sits further back and above, giving you a clear layout of the landscape. Then, when you enter combat, the camera shifts to an over-the-shoulder viewpoint, making it easier to hit targets. In the case of Jet Force, your character's outline forms a silhouette as well. This slight change is welcome because it's easier to see and destroy enemies. And in a game where you're fighting waves of bugs and robots, you need that clarity. You can see similar strategies applied to recent titles, like Gears of War. These different angles feel natural and don't take your focus away from the action. Yet Force employed these strategies more than a decade earlier. That's pretty dang impressive. That's not to say there aren't problems. While this viewpoint gives you a decent crosshair, it's a tad imprecise. That's not even down to poor implementation by Rare. The N64 just wasn't capable of that level of accuracy. Nonetheless, it can be a big problem. When you're under massive pressure from a squad of bugs, the least of your concerns should be aiming inaccuracies. The idea of sniping a drone from a distance with a pistol is badass. Not so exciting when it's difficult to replicate. Force also utilizes strafing, another unique and intuitive feature for the time. This comes in handy for those times where you're trying to, not die. You use the side C buttons to do this, and while that might sound horrible, it works well most of the time. Any problems arise when you add in movement. The game wants to assist you in shooting, which is wonderful since the manual aiming isn't the easiest to use. The ability to pick off enemies this way makes combat less frustrating, yet sometimes when an enemy gets close and you want to back up, the camera and movement don't mix. In the end, it leaves you missing out on the action and taking some needless damage. It's annoying and what? I don't like it. In contrast to the rest of the game, though, boss fights are fantastic because you're locked onto one path. This means you can focus on aiming and strafing without worrying about any extra motion. This allows you to focus your attention forward, which is necessary in these more challenging battles. In this way, it's all about dodging attacks and striking at the critical moment. There's a certain level of strategy required here, and it makes these trials both imposing and enjoyable. Issues or not, though, Force is just a good time. It's hectic and thrilling in ways most games of the time couldn't match. The camera might be a bit janky here and there, and aiming isn't rigid enough, like I said. But man, sending bug limbs and intros all over the place? You hit them with the rockets, they go boom, and it's just black. Guts everywhere. It's great. Seriously though, look, blood, insides, severed bug heads? I can't think of many games that visceral for the time. More so than taking the visual style to a different level though, I love how this aids the tone of the game. When you see cutscenes of the drones hurting and slaughtering the tribals, you can't help but feel sorry for them. Add to that all the damage they've caused you from the start, and it's personal. Blasting these beasts to bits is all the more sweet when you see such explosive results, and besides, insects are gross. They deserve it. That's not to say everything in the game deserved a horrible fate, yet there were aspects that were included that only served to diminish the experience and were really kind of unneeded. I mean, credit to Rare for trying some fresh, bold ideas. Gotta give some serious props for that. They were innovators in every sense of the word, and there's a reason why they're so revered to this day. But they didn't need to include platforming and collectibles in just about every game that they made. Force Gemini could have relied on its gunplay and weapon upgrades alone. Yet they decided the inclusion of these other aspects would be a wonderful idea. Jumping in this game, much to my chagrin, is like aiming. imprecise, and clunky. Those are not words you want to hear when you're describing a gameplay feature. Yet aiming is at least passable because of the help the game provides. Manual aiming is only required for those times when an enemy sits at a height where auto-targeting won't take over. Since most enemies do sit at a nice height, you learn early on that you don't have to worry about manual aiming too much. And if any enemies do sit at a different height, it's usually a cluster of robots, in which case the machine gun makes quick work of them despite aiming's finicky nature. Jumping, however, has no such aids. It's one quick motion that has little forward momentum or control. Making a leap like this is one thing. I mean, I don't feel like they're asking a whole lot of me there. But do you see this? And all for a couple of tribals? Sorry, I know I'm supposed to save you guys, but I've tried this over and over again and I just can't do it. You got yourself stuck up there. You find a way down. The real issue with the game comes in the form of collecting the cuddly tribals. Their plight is one that draws sympathy from the Jet Force crew, and as a result the player. You want to save as many of them as possible. The bugs might deserve a gory fate, but seeing families blown apart? That's some heavy stuff. That doesn't mean in one sweep through you'll be able to find them all. Rather, you can't even if you wanted to. You'll have to traverse back through the same sections if you missed any the first go-around. Add to that the fact that you have to get them all to finish the game, and it goes from tedious to outright unfair. The idea of recoming back through levels with improved firepower is pretty exciting too. You have more items at your disposal, allowing you to access new areas, and on top of that, you're more effective based on your weaponry and experience. This makes the game a blast when you return to the first planet, access a new area, and whoa! This is challenging. It was just child's play a second ago. Exploration and greater obstacles are both thrilling and welcome. By conquering this new zone, you can then reach places you didn't think existed, like the abandoned ship. These moments are always a nice surprise, yet I could have done without having to get every single tribal in the process. And I could understand if you had to save a certain percentage or something. You want to beat the game? Alright, collect the ship parts and save half the tribals in the process. See, that's a little more reasonable, but the goal they have in mind is ridiculous. I mean, there's 282 of the buggers out there waiting to be saved. They can even die during missions. They're not like the ammo crates that are just hanging out. So if they get blown to bits, you gotta restart the whole thing. The missions are lengthy too, which on its own I enjoy a great deal. The enjoyment of exploring areas and killing bugs outweighs the tedium from collecting most of the time. But when you see the number of tribals update to show one has died, it turns from enjoyment to frustration. Because let's face it, resetting 30 minutes of progress is always going to be irritating. To be clear, I love these types of challenges. I'm someone who will go out of my way to get them all. But should someone have to get them all to even finish the game? I'd say no. Let's move on to something more positive and well-designed. In fact, it just might be my favorite thing in this entire game: the music and sound design. I've said it before, but well-crafted songs and dynamic sound effects add so much weight to the experience. Force Gemini is no exception. The soundtrack is wonderful for how it drives the tone. Starting out, there's hopeful melodies and bouncy beats, and it sparks you to venture forward and take the fight to the enemy. Then when the going gets tough, the music shifts to moody horns and booming drums. All these changes suit each situation marvelously, setting the stage for each challenge in your path. More than the music though, the sound effects give this game a polish beyond its years. I'd say they're in contention for best sound effects on the N64. What makes them so great is they help immerse you in the experience. Machine gun fire, explosions, rockets, the cries of the drones, blood splatters. Each of these sound effects are punchy and add a layer of detail to every skirmish. Of course, mowing through waves of enemies with a torrent of bullets and rockets feels satisfying. When it sounds like this though, it immerses you in the experience even further. It's an auditory blast to the senses, and without these sound effects, you wouldn't have felt as powerful. When I picked this game back up, I wasn't sure if I'd enjoy it the same way I did more than a decade ago. The N64 is notorious for its amazing games and their not so graceful aging. Yet the aspects Jet Force nailed on the first go-around still feel so solid. It's all still there, and it's clear Rare had something unique on their hands. While they were important for how they shaped Donkey Kong, they created some fantastic IPs on their own. Force Gemini was one of them, and I'm disappointed it never had the chance to evolve. I'd like to imagine that a sequel on the GameCube would have given them more room to push the boundaries, maybe even rectify some of those issues too. Oh well, that's a hypothetical that'll have to sit on the shelf for now. And no, Jet Force is by no means the best game out there. Unfortunate as it is to say, for most people it's a game destined to fade into obscurity. Not for me though. This was yet another N64 title that captured my attention and solidified my love of video games when I was a kid. It's what got me into shooters in the first place, and despite its problems, I'll always have a soft spot for it.